Well, welcome to a new Team CGC 9.8 video. So I thought it'd be an interesting sort of contrarian type of video to talk about some CGC 9.8 comic books that have cooled off in price. Let's call it over the last 3 to 5 years. Because, I say contrarian because I think out in the sort of YouTube comic book universe, there's a lot of sort of this week's hot comic book type of videos. And that's kind of cool. Like, it's cool to stay on top of what's popular, but I think, essentially those hot comic book videos in the most part are like almost do not buy lists. Because, if they're hot, that means there's a lot of promotion, and that's going to drive the demand and the prices up. And then when all that's gone, the prices drop, basically. And, the promotion's not going to last forever. So kind of interesting, those videos, to stay on top of what's hot, but I wanted to just, do a complete 180 or 360, whatever you want to call it, and just talk about some CGC 9.8 books that, as I said, really have cooled off in price. Basically, all these books over the last, let's call it anywhere from the last couple months to the last couple years were at higher prices than where they are now. So, I think some of these could be really good buying opportunities. There's great prices for most of these books. There's low expectations for most of these books, so any sort of surprise appearance and whatever show or whatever promotion would really help the prices. But yeah, really, and doing the research for this video, definitely there's, a couple books that I don't have that are on the list here that I think I do want to grab. Yeah, really kind of good, juicy list of some great CGC 9.8 books at great prices for this list. First, I want to go over an Ultimate Fallout number 4 really quick and talk about it for a second, because I would have sort of had it on this video because I had mentioned, let's just call it in the last month or two here, this book had sort of come down to like the $350 price range, and I had picked this one up here for $354, I think it was, or something like that. $355, I guess we'll call it. And mentioning at that time that rarely was this book was under $400, so I thought it was a kind of a buying opportunity that you wanted to, jump on. And would have had it on this video if I was seeing some of the prices still kicking around $350, but there were like 2 completed listings. One was $400 and one was $427. So it kind of seems like this one's, coming back up, but I would look for lulls before the sort of next Into the Spider-Verse movie comes out or something like that, because I think really long term, this is going to be a great one. This compares very well to its sort of comparable CGC 9.8 books. It's more rare than all its immediate comparables, and we've talked about that in prior videos. But if you can get this closer to $350, I think, this is a book that did cool off, but I guess the prices are heating up again, looking at some of the current prices that I was just seeing. But still wanted to mention it, but not a part of the list. So let's get right into the list of 7 here. First book on the list, Batman Avengers of Bane special. First appearance and origin of Bane. Yeah, a really great 90s book to get. And looking on the census for this one, 792 in the CGC 9.8 out there in the blue label. And 31% is the CGC 9.8 ratio, which is kind of getting a little high, but it is a 90s book, sort of an early 90s book too, 1993, January this came out. So, you're not going to expect the rarity to be super, super rare. But, talking about books that are cooling off, during The Dark Knight Rises, I believe it was, where Bane was the villain, Tom Hardy played him. Really very popular at the time. This book, shot up to definitely over 300, and had sort of people telling me that, basically this book was going for 350 easy around that time. Since has cooled down then, so you can basically get this book in a new case if you're patient in an auction for about $225. I would say is about the fair market value. Maybe if you're lucky around 200. In an old case, I've seen them in for 200. So depending on what way you want to go. But, this is a book that, and kind of a similar situation with some of these books here where they were in a movie, the prices really heated up, a lot of them sold for, a lot more at that time, let's call it $350, and now I would say for the last 2 years, this has really cooled down to that $225 price range where I think right now you could step in and buy it. Iconic first appearance and origin. This is probably the most iconic villain in Batman that you could buy the first appearance of for like a reasonable price in the 9.8. Yeah, first appearance, Origin of Bane. Yeah, I think it's one to get at in that 225 level if you can find a really, really nice one in a new case. Next book is one I do not have, and I've tried to buy this one in the past, and I kind of wish I did, but it's X Factor number 6, first full appearance of Apocalypse. And this is certainly one that has cooled off in price as well, kind of since that X-Men movie came out, which was over 5 years ago now, I would say. X-Men Apocalypse. There's 893 CGC 9.8s in the blue label. 19.8% is the CGC 9.8 ratio, so anything under 20 I like to see. So that's kind of getting into a pretty good investment grade rarity, I would say, in the CGC 9.8. And for this book, I had saw one. It was posted in Canada, and I had tried to buy this book in the past, and this is my experience trying to buy it in Canada. And it was, I believe it was the final price was $225, and he had the auction starting at $200. And I believe I didn't bid $225 over $225, and I really probably should have because it was a nice centered one, and it was one where I was trying to attempt to get a really good deal near $200. I think this book, though, at $225 for a really nice one in a new case is definitely worth it. Certainly worth it. I've seen them go closer to $200 in an old case. I think even under $200 in an old case. Maybe where the pictures aren't looking that good. But if you get a really good scan and it's looking really good, it's probably going to be about $225. Maybe even for a really nice one, $250. I know there's probably newsstands for this too, and that could even be worth paying over $250 for. Watch out for this one. Buy it now is on the internet. I was looking. They're like $350, $399. People trying to get more for this book, but if you're patient in an auction, it's kind of like, I think, for a really, really good looking one, like it won't go higher than $250. I don't think so in an auction. But yeah, since that X-Men movie, that price has certainly cooled off. I think during that movie, this was, I think even knocking on $400 this book. From sort of what I remember vaguely, and just looking at the CGC 9.8 ratio, it being under 20. It's a pretty rare book, so I could easily see this book kicking on 400 in a movie environment. If you can get it for $225 now, X Factor number 6, first full Apocalypse, great first appearance of a really iconic, awesome villain for that price. Similar situation to Bane, but it's even more rare. So one I don't have, and one I would really want to add to, especially kind of doing this research for the list too. Next book, it's a really cool book that I don't have either, and another one that kind of sort of makes me want it after doing some of the research here. It's an Avengers 181. This is the first appearance of Scott Lang, who becomes Ant-Man, and the first new team Avengers book, when the first appearance of the new team, I guess, when they got a new team together. And certainly relates to those Avengers movies that came out, and Scott Lang was in those movies, and obviously the Ant-Man movies came out too. So this is a book that really heated up during that time. It's looking good on the census. I think that's why it really heated up. 163 CGC 9.8s, and 17.8% is the CGC 9.8 ratio. Well, an older book, though, admittedly. It's a 1980s book, I believe. So you're going to see the lower CGC. Actually, for an 80s book, it's actually not that low a CGC 9.8 ratio for a book coming out in 1980. But 163 only in the CGC 9.8, so not a lot out there. So this book, again, Buy It Now is out there. There's one for $500 I saw as a Buy It Now, and that's really someone trying to get that movie type of price around it, because I think this book was really about $450 to $500 during peak sort of, when Scott Lang came out in the Avengers movies, things like that. Kicking around $450, $500. Now $300 for this book. I've documented on her pricing videos. I think one even went lower than that, to be honest. I think it was one was like $379.99 kind of deal, or $279.99. Sorry, but $299.99. I'm pretty sure I've documented that like 2 or 3 times on our pricing videos throughout the past couple months here. So yeah, Avengers 181. I think around that $300 price level for a really good one. I think it is a good book to have. Certainly, if you love Avengers and maybe you're nostalgic for the movies and stuff, this could be one book to have. And yeah, another thing to mention too, first appearance of Scott Lang. It's always good to get first appearances of like heroes. I know X Factor number 6, its first full apocalypse is a villain. Sometimes the heroes really can catch traction, those type of books, over the long term. So first Scott Lang, Avengers 181, around $300. Yeah, first new team Avengers, cool cover. I think is one to kind of grab at if you can get it under 300 would be my recommendation. All right, next book is Silver Surfer 44, and I got 2 of these. And I probably should have brought up my other CGC 9.8 because I grabbed 2 of these, and it's such a great example of kind of a full circle. Like I experienced the full circle of the price range on this book, whereas these ones I'm just kind of knowing from what I've heard. People tell me. But Silver Surfer 44 is the first appearance of the Infinity Gauntlet. And yeah, this book got hot definitely during all the Avengers movies, all of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, where, the Infinity Gauntlet was, prominently featured in all those movies. So mentioned I got 2 of them. We'll go over the price in a sec. On the census, though, there's 240 in the CGC 9.8, which actually is not that much for a 1990s book. It's came out in December 1990. So, yeah, not too much. I kind of expected it to be a little bit higher than that. 23% is the CGC 9.8 ratio. So, pretty good rarity, actually, for an early 90s book. But price. I paid for one of mine during Avengers Endgame. I paid $225 to $230, and which was the fair value during that time. It was in an auction, and that was basically the price I expected to pay. I, was hoping maybe I would pay closer to $200, but ended up paying $225, I think it was. Second one, about 6 months after Avengers Endgame was out of theaters, so the promos died down. Saw another auction for one pop up, and I grabbed that one for $157, I think it was, or $156 or something like that. So, during the movie, $220. After 6 months after the movie, $155, let's call it. So, just a good full circle example of, what we talk about a lot is you don't want to rush out there and buy something that from if a movie gets you excited or a show gets you excited or an announcement gets you excited, or there's going to be a lot of other people that are excited and that drives up the demand and the prices. So that happened to me for this book, and I was a bit naive buying my first copy, but got a really good deal on the second copy. Someone on the team had let me know in the comments that they picked up one for $169.99, and I believe it was Jerry in the comments actually, who's kind of one of our original team members, had let me know $169.99. I think that's a really good price for this book. I think for that auction that I grabbed this in, it was pretty rock bottom. I think 150-ish. I think is going to be pretty rock bottom for a while on this issue. $169.99 is kind of, I think, the current fair market value, whereas during Avengers Endgame and, for about a year or two before that, the fair market value was about $225, $230. So, yeah, cool down in prices. You get it closer to $150. I still think if you got a long-term time horizon, like 10, 15, 20 years, first appearance of Infinity Gauntlet will be a pretty cool book to have for $150. I think I could easily see, like, when all these kids that have really loved these Avengers movies grow up and get decent jobs, this book will be like $250 to $300. Especially because it looks decent on the census, too, for an early 90s book. Not too bad. So, picking that up for closer to $150, I would recommend. Next book is Uncanny XMen 221. This is the first appearance of Mr. Sinister. A villain that's been kind of speculated about in the last couple, even years, I would say, that Mr. Sinister could be the next MCU villain, because you have sort of X-Men coming back from the Fox productions, and Deadpool's kind of coming back from, all coming back to the MCU. So lots of speculation about Mr. Sinister maybe being the next major MCU villain. He's kind of like pulling the strings behind the scenes, so there's a lot of potential with Mr. Sinister, and he looks cool. Like, I love Mr. Sinister. There's, I think it's Uncanny XMen 239, I believe it is, maybe. Really cool Mr. Sinister cover. That's not a key issue, but one of my favorite Uncanny XMen issues, if you ever wanted to look into that. But 946, CGC 9.8 in the blue label. 37% is the CGC 9.8 ratio, so this is the least rare book on the whole list. Least rare. And that kind of makes a little bit of sense seeing it come down in price. This issue has definitely cooled off. I had got really back into buying CGC 9.8 books, comic books about 3 years ago, but CGC 9.8 is about 2 years ago. And the whole time, this book was about $220, let's call it, $230 for the CGC 9.8. And I almost bought a couple issues a bunch of times too, but just never kind of pulled the trigger or just got outbid. And most recently, though, I would say in the last 3 to 5 months, let's call it, really seeing this dip below 200. So I would say right now, like 175 is the fair market value for this book. And, not the rarest book out there, but I do think first appearance of Mr. Sinister, he is such a cool villain. And even if you could get it closer to 150, yeah, I think that would be, with the higher CGC 9.8 ratio, I think 150 is like, you can maybe even be patient on this book and wait for it to fall even more, possibly. But you never know, because I think those whispers are really picking up, to be honest, that maybe Mr. Sinister is one of the next big MCU villains. I got the newsstand version here. This one was $250. Newsstand version from the late 80s. Newsstands are very elusive, so did probably a bit of a pay up for this book in the current environment, $250 in the newsstand, but considering the directs were for about a year or two, again, up until about 4 or 5 months ago, the directs were going for like $220, $230. So to get the newsstand for like just a couple, 10 or 20 bucks more than that sort of price from not too long ago, I think was a decent deal. And yeah, that one, it's a bit, certainly if you love X-Men, you love Mr. Sinister. I really like Mr. Sinister. I had a lot of action figures of him when I was growing up. I really just liked the look of him and everything, and certainly read some of the Uncanny XMen comics too. So he's very popular, but it's not the rarest. So yeah, maybe try to get this one closer to 150 in the direct if you could. Might be a good book to try to get a really good deal on. Okay, second to last book here, Amazing Spider-Man number 252. Yeah, I brought out my direct edition today. I got the newsstand edition too in this book. Both really nice, kind of centered, crisp 9.8s. But yes, this is the tied for the first appearance of the black costume. It's an Amazing Fantasy 15 cover homage, which is the first appearance of Spider-Man in the Silver Age back in the 60s. Homage that cover, yeah, and that's, I think over time, this is one of the first homages of that Amazing Fantasy 15, and I think for that reason it'll be a really good kind of investment grade book. Cooling off in price, this one. Just on the census though, really quick, 1,193 CGC 9.8s in the blue label. 11.5% is the CGC 9.8 ratio, which is the lowest on the whole list. So, relatively speaking, this is the most rare book out of the whole entire list. Fair market value for this book, let's call it 6 months for, 6 months ago. And kind of a similar situation to Mr. Sinister. The whole time I was really buying CGC 9.8 books for about 2 years. This book was like $450 to $500 in an auction. Like, that was a good fair market value for it in the CGC 9.8. I think it was being heavily recommended on the back of how awesome Amazing Fantasy 15 was doing in prices. Like, the price just kept going up for that. So people were recommending to buy this book a lot. So yeah, $450 to $500 was a fair market value price during that time. Last 3 months here, $350. I've seen quite a few go for. There was a kind of buy it now or best offer for $350 that had like 15 offers, so he must have been trying to just get under $350 for his. But yeah, I think $350 for this book. If you can get $350 in the newsstand, would be even better. Newsstand a little bit more rare, not as rare during this kind of during this era, but there were more. Not equal parts direct and newsstand, but they were more equal than late 80s and early 90s. So yeah, for a really nice copy in a new case, around $350 with, maybe a little bit for shipping too, so $360 all in or something like that. I think it's a really good deal for this book. It's one you kind of just, I think if you can get it on this pullback in price, I don't think it's one that's going to be around 300 for very long. I could see it going back up over 400 easily because yeah, with that 11.5% CGC 9.8 ratio, it's very relatively rare. And like a book it somewhat reminds me of is like Incredible Hulk 340, which is not as rare. The CGC 9.8 ratio is higher on that book. So this book's more rare than Incredible Hulk 340, but at 350 is going for less price than Incredible Hulk 340. Whereas, yeah, Hulk 340 basically like 400 now, for a little over 400 for a nice one. Yeah, so around 350, I think this is one you can get in there and buy a cooling off book and feel really good about it. Because especially with Amazing Spider-Man books, yeah, they're so iconic and so they're so wanted, and they're kind of easy to sell, and yeah, you gotta, I think with that book in particular, and why I put it on the list, with that Amazing Fantasy 15 cover homage, you got a real good chance of it over time just becoming a really good collector item, and one of the Spider-Man books to get if you're sort of on a budget, if you can't afford kind of first Spider-Man. Okay, last book. Yeah, alright. Last book on the list, and kind of the big book, save it for the end. New Mutants 98. First appearance of Deadpool. A couple other first appearances in there too. 3,074 of these in the CGC 9.8 blue label on the census. Lots of them in the early 90s with a very popular character, and that's how you get the 3,000. Lots of books printed in the early 90s. 20% is the CGC 9.8 ratio, which is kind of bang on average. I always use New Mutants 98 as almost an average CGC 9.8 ratio. Sort of average to getting into being investment grade is sort of 21, 22. Lower the better, so the lower the ratio is, the better. So, yeah, obviously in a list of books that are cooling off in price, Cold as Ice. This book now in a direct edition, I had saw in an auction one go for $610 in a direct edition. But we'll call it fair market value for a direct $650 right now. And, certainly on the back of the first Deadpool movie, and there was a kind of a big pop again with after the Deadpool movies after that too. But during that whole time, this book was really like, let's call it 900 at 850 to 900 at least. Certainly, I think there was some books that went over 1,000 there for a while. It really blew up in popularity. So, let's call it, I don't know, it's maybe been 5 years since that first Deadpool movie now. From, let's call it 950 to, from $1,000 at its peak, let's call it, I guess, to now 650. It's cooled off. It is an early 90s book, and that's why, one of the big reasons why I think it's cooled off. I don't think, 5 years ago people expected the census to explode to over 300 3,000 CGC 9.8s. But I think at this point, around, again, that one auction went for 610. If you can get this close to 600, and, it is an early 90s book, so the newsstand version, highly recommended, because there were so many direct versions at this point, because comic shops were so popular, getting tons of books. So the newsstand versions are quite elusive during this period, and a little more rare, so newsstand about $750, direct edition about $650, I think are, yeah, really good prices to pay for like a really nicely centered New Mutants 98. And I think, yeah, at this point, given, you're getting first appearance of Deadpool, such an iconic hero, and kind of the same argument about Scott Lang, heroes I think are a little bit more special than villains. And then, yeah, just, put together that it's come back in price so much. I do think it's probably one you want to buy. Not to mention those Deadpool coming back to the MCU. There's going to be a Deadpool movie in the next 3 to 5 years, let's call it, for sure. Whether it's an XMen crossover or whatever it might be, there's definitely going to be a Deadpool movie. And yeah, I wouldn't really see this book going for like $610 in an auction during like, there's a Deadpool movie now. So, and then long term, Deadpool. Iconic superheroes do really well over the long term first appearances, so I think you're going to be fine long term with this book. Okay, so with this video I wanted to attempt to talk about some books that weren't hot, just pretty much as cold as I could think without recommending something that I don't think is very iconic or anything, or didn't have a first appearance or something. So although these books are cold, and they with them being cold, they're at really good prices. and they're still, you know, as we went over, really cool, iconic first appearances. And I think, you know, my pick out of the list are almost like the 2 books that I don't have, apparently, unfortunately. Like X Factor number 6, First Full Apocalypse, with under 20 CGC 9.8 ratio for like $225. I think that's great in the CGC 9.8. And Avengers 181, First New Team, First Scott Lang, for around $300. That's come down in price a lot. Like, and again, there's still buy it nows on the internet right now for $500 for that book, but in auctions I've seen it go for $300. And those would kind of be my probably 2 top picks. And then Amazing Spider-Man 252, I think, as well. Certainly such an iconic issue, and yeah, for it to be going for about $450 to $500 for about a year or 2, I would say, at least. And for them, a lot to be going now for like $350, I think that's one you want to jump into. And yeah, the first one we mentioned, Ultimate Fallout 4, hopefully you find a deal on that. If you're on top of the search results and maybe an auction pops up, you get that close to $350. I think that's a good deal. But yeah, I didn't include it on the list, as I said, because yeah, just this past week, one went for $400 and one went for $427 in the CGC 9.8 first appearance of Miles Morales. Still a book, you know, yeah, again, hopefully you get it closer to $350. Alright, yeah, you know what, I think those hot comic book videos out there on everyone's YouTube channels are, you know, pretty fun to watch and pretty cool to know what's popular, but, you know, if you're going out on the internet and buying those books, a lot of times you're going to pay too much for them. So certainly worth it to think about the complete opposite of that. Some cool books, some books that have cooled down in price that you can go after that are still really iconic. And I feel that that's probably, you know, I'm not an expert or anything, but that's probably a much more savvy way to go about buying comics rather than staying really on top of those hot comic videos and, you know, going down that route. Just kind of buy what you love. With, you know, books that have sort of cooled off in price, so you can get a reasonable price for some of these awesome first appearances and key issues. Okay, really quick, I would invite you to join the team and subscribe to Team CGC 9.8 and hit the bell to get all our latest notifications. Add me on Instagram and Twitter too. I got all the links in the description below for all that stuff. But yeah, I'm really glad I can kind of go at it from a bit of a contrarian lens and bring out some, you know, books that have gone for a lot higher prices in the last 3 to 5 years. So I think jumping in here and, you know, getting these books for a lower price is going to be kind of a savvy buy, I think, over the long term. So thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate all the comments and the support and some of the conversations I'm having on Instagram too. Yeah, just love talking comic books. So get at me on Instagram if you do have any questions or whatever it might be. Thank you very much for watching today. I'll see you on the next one.